Here we are, magically appearing. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Critics, first of all. I'm Emily Pine. I'm going to be chairing the BLAST, Dublin International Theatre Festival International Critics Forum. And joining me today are Helen Meany, Peter Crawley, and Robert Van Hoven to talk about the shows that have been able to go ahead in the show this year. So welcome, everybody, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to say that for anybody watching, there is a chat function. We're going to be talking about the shows, and then towards the end of the time, going to have some opportunity for just general discussion. So if you have questions or comments and you want to put them in the chat, hold on to them for the beginning and then add them as we get towards the discussion session. We'd love to hear your perspectives as well. Okay, so we have 4 shows that we are going to talk about today, and are the ones that could happen. Some of them are virtual, and then one of them happened in real time in life. And we are going to take To Be a Machine version 1.0 by Dead Centre first, which obviously happened in the Project Art Centre, but was streamed live then to those of us who were watching at home, or wherever it was we were watching. Robert, I think you were able to watch it from the Netherlands, which is, I guess, one of the advantages of things being online.
That is one of the advantages. Yeah, to see theater from all places and experience it. Yeah, that's amazing. To be present in Ireland when being in Holland, that's nice. Yeah. Also now, actually.
Yeah, exactly. So welcome. No air miles involved.
No.
So
it's
we're
much
really
greener than flying there.
Yeah, exactly. So you saw To Be a Machine. Had you ever seen any of Dead Centre's work before?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I think when I was the earlier edition of the Dublin Theatre Festival, and they went to Noorderzon Festival in Groningen, where I work. So I think I saw 1 or 2 performances they made. Yeah.
So you were slightly primed as to what to expect. So what did you make of To Be a Machine?
Well, it's slightly different, of course, than the other things they made because, well, this is virtual. I really liked it because it started, of course, with the premise of wanting to be in the theater again, which I think all of us theater lovers from March on were really craving. The first show I saw live, like a month ago, it was really emotional because I was live. So they start out with this premise that you want to have those bodies together in one space, in one time. And what if we find ways to get those bodies together when their bodies cannot be together? And of course, then they take it to the whole Mark O'Connell book, which I also find really interesting. So what does it mean to be a human? Is a very interesting question. And also, can you be... What they very cleverly do is take the premise of theater, throw it around to make their thematical point, which I really, really like. So, first of all, of course, the virtual aspect of theater, but then, of course, they also play with who can play who. So can I upload my thoughts? Can Mark O'Connell upload his thoughts in a theater script and put it in the head of an actor? And is then the actor Mark O'Connell or not? This is what I found a really clever way of using theater to make the theme. So I saw Mark O'Connell speak at a conference a couple of years ago. So the themes they addressed, they were not new to me, but I can imagine if they are new to you, they're very mind-blowing. The very idea that there are people who want to upload their soul into the clouds, or to be decapitated after death because they want to stay alive. It's crazy. So they take it's more than documentaries. That's nice. They take the premise of theater to throw it around and to make their thematical points, which I find really clever. Yeah. And technically, I was amazed because I work for a company that also had to struggle with the technicalities of virtual theater, and I know how difficult it is. So I was really impressed technically how they did this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's brilliant. That it just shows, I think, how it can function on all these different levels. That we are asking, and we're watching for different things. Like technically, it was brilliant, and we can't, really talk about lighting and so on in the same way. So we're talking about editing and everything. And Peter, did you want to pick up on any of those?
Yeah, I agree. I think this was probably, you don't want to use the word fortunate in these circumstances. So I will just say there was a timely coincidence of material and context for this adaptation of Mark O'Connell's book. We're talking about transhumanism, which may still feel like a rather sort of exotic and niche area of thought to anybody until you consider the fact that we currently are disembodied heads having a conversation in a work context, to anybody who is itching to check their phone for push alerts for the latest restrictions to be announced or for the whatever. I also saw Mark O'Connell speak on the subject, and he referred to a conversation about the singularity, which he's also referred to as the rapture of the nerds, the point when we all sort of, leave our bodies and join that great mainframe in the sky. And when discussing this with somebody, he held up his phone and said, maybe it's already happened. Maybe this is already it. I think kind of the circumstances that we find ourselves in now make us a bit more aware of that. So the premise is essentially already kind of set up, and it lends itself to theatrical riffs on the subject. So when Robert says kind of to make the theatre itself kind of an element of the aesthetic or artistic concern or the grammar of it, Dead Center as a company are inclined to turn the gun on themselves, ruminatively speaking, and have done so in a lot of their work. What is the effort? What are we doing? In what way are we implied or implicated in our processes? I think you felt that very much in shows like Chekhov's first play, even Beckett's Room from last year. And what I found quite similar in this undertaking, which was so, fresh and different, and I have to say kind of an exemplar of what a streaming performance might be. It really felt like they were taking, full of the medium they found, learning from all the things that they'd done. And in a way that didn't feel at all ad hoc or like a sort of, a contingency or an emergency measure, had put something together that made the great uses of the things that were available to make the material resonate. But when they talk about is a play a programmatic thing? Is theatre a programmatic thing? That's where they turn the gun on themselves. Are we implicated in the transhumanist movement by making a hermetically sealed artistic event? I think they may overstress the point a little bit. And there's a catastrophe introduced in that thinking where the desired outcome, the programmatic detail, a line that is supposed to elicit pathos, solicits a laugh from the audience, which becomes a cascade of laughter from the audience as Jack Gleeson, as Mark O'Connell himself collapses. And it feels like both a riff on Beckett's catastrophe, in which the actor figure does something similar to the director's intention, but then it was also, ironically, something that they had pre-programmed. It was something also that made use of our participation, which we couldn't have anticipated. We were put into the response that was both desired and not wanted. And so then you feel like another element in the sort of great algorithm of their game. Which I think again reflects artfully on the consideration that they've invested into it, but maybe not quite so satisfyingly as the zeitgeist, the premise that sort of initially delivered. The game plane is really witty, really enjoyable. It slightly loses fact of, I think, the motivations of the book, which are ironically much more human, and I think motivated more by Mark O'Connell's sense of how he relates to the birth of a son, the fragility of the human body, and sort of this kind of almost ludicrous desire that there be an alternative. And that's, from the book, that's what actually resonated more with me then. And I wonder if that might still be a focus. And in a way, they problematize the fact that Mark O'Connell has been supplanted by this Jack Gleeson fella who has come to learn and displace him. But it also displaces Mark's personal concerns and, in a strange way, some of the humanity of the book.
But still, I think, if I may, Emily, is that the human aspect is more about this, is in the situation. We cannot be together as humans. And they demonstrate how that you can do something with it theatrically, but it's not the same as being like this human bodies seeing human emotions live on stage, which during the performance I really felt I missed that.
Yeah.
Because of the coronavirus. So the human aspect was maybe more in the context of why they had to do this, like this, than literally in the performance itself. But maybe that's me, but that is what I really liked about it.
It's very artfully simulated. I thought the fact that they had anticipated that was sort of beyond attentive and clever, and that in the sound design, which was kind of one of the strongest elements, the sound design from Kevin Gleeson, they had introduced the background chatter like down to the coughs and sneezes, which is, you know, no small thing at the moment to hear a cough and a sneeze and a say bless you in the simulation of an audience. But I found it simultaneously reassuring. I was suckered by it. I was all in my earphones. I was given a simulation of a theatre audience experience that felt to me both real and reassuring and concerning.
Helen, did you spot yourself in the audience?
Oh, very, very briefly. I'm glad, actually, because I would have found that totally distracting. I thought that was so clever, the way that suddenly the lights went up and then we had all of the heads. I mean, it seems to me that dead center were being themselves, and to kind of almost the nth degree of they're so meta. I mean, the meta the better for them, and the sort of reflexiveness of always bringing back the ideas about transhumanism back to the theatre, and then sort of embodying that in the performance was, I mean, incredibly clever and original. And I think playful. There was a I think a sort of a wit to it, which I really enjoyed. And sometimes they lost that a little when it became too much of a sort of a TED talk. And I know this is the first iteration of it, so I think it will probably change a lot. And then at the very end, we come back to this idea of the eternal quest to defy death, and the quest for immortality, and that didn't feel quite grounded in what we'd seen before, but it did go back to Mark O'Connell's book more. So I think it's kind of going in and out of its relationship with the book, but it's still very much their own, And I thought it was a really impressive achievement.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you mentioned that it's like the first iteration as well, because like you say, I think that this provides a very particular context for doing this work, and it would be very interesting, given what we've all said, to think about how it might develop, and how it might still continue to play with that virtual and meta level, but in a post-vaccine context, or wherever we wind up next year. Helen, I'm going to keep you talking and move on to 1,000 Ways, which was written and created by Abigail Browder and Michael Silverstone. It was originally intended to be 2 events in the programme, both a kind of virtual event by phone call and then a kind of real life event where we met, where strangers met each other. And obviously we couldn't do the real life event, so it reverted, but at least they could do, the festival could put on half of the show, and you and I separately, because you can't talk to someone which is disappointing, phoned in and kind of participated in this piece of theatre with a stranger on the other end of the line and a narrator. How did you experience the phone call?
Well, so you dial in, and then you're greeted by a robotic kind of voice, and then you're introduced. You are either A or B. You're caller A or B. I was B, and then you're taken through a very structured interaction where the robot, we call it the robot, asks A and B a series of questions, the same questions, and waits for the pause, and then the robot sort of sketches a scenario, and I don't know whether it's the same on each call, but I presume it is, whereby we have to imagine, both callers have to imagine that they're stranded in the desert and your car is broken down, and we're sort of being tested on our reaction. So the whole idea is that we encounter a complete stranger, and that through these some quite banal questions, we find out something about their life or what it is like to be them. So I think it's intended to be a sort of an exercise in empathy. I found it quite unsatisfactory, and I thought that the structure was so rigid. We weren't able to follow any particular track, so that caller A would answer a question with maybe something quite intriguing or interesting, but then it was back to me to answer the same question. So instead of it being maybe like a video game where you could choose your own path, or you could choose what questions you found more interesting, and then create something, well, who knows where you could have gone with that. We constantly were going back to sometimes just, counting backwards, describing, moving to a different part of the room, describing what you could see. So that was good as an icebreaker, but in the end, there wasn't enough at stake. I felt I actually didn't learn as much as I would have liked to about my caller. I learned a couple of things that were important, like that she was really attached to her mother. Her mother was the most important person in her life. But I don't know whether it would be the other way around if I had been caller A. But I seem to talk. I mean, I seem to be telling my whole life story, and she seemed to be not being asked as much, or as many questions, or the questions she was being asked weren't as probing. So that was odd. And in the end, I put down the phone feeling I didn't really find out very much about her. So I felt it was a bit unsatisfactory. But in fact, the call I was on, we were being recorded. So the company are still developing it. It felt still very much a work in progress to me. Really interesting premise, but I think it needed to be more imaginative in what actually happened on the call.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mention questions, whether they were probing or not. I actually, and calling the voice the robot, because that was my major issue with it. And I see someone commenting in the chat as well about that it wasn't responsive in any way to the people. And so you were actually being asked quite personal, quite intrusive questions, which I don't have a problem with in theory, except that then you were left in this kind of weird limbo. So just as an example, the person I was on with, person A, was asked, did they have siblings growing up? And do they now still have those siblings? Yeah. And the outcome of that question was very difficult for them. And then at the end of the phone call, they just hang up and you don't have any moment to say goodbye. And I thought, we are just emotionally adrift here. Yeah. Without kind of opportunity to really, so in a sense it was about intimacy and connection and trying to use imagination to bridge these gaps, and yet I found it underlining the gaps between us in a strange way. And it wasn't the form via phone call. I really think if there had been a live moderator, it would have felt very, very different. It was the pre-recorded nature of the voice and the narrator.
Yeah, it was too rigid, though, that format. And I thought, it's going to change. And I also thought returning to the imagined scenario in the desert, I thought, please give us something else so that something can develop. So nothing developed. And and even when the answers to the questions, like caller A was asked, we were both asked, had we ever owned a gun? And in this case, my caller A, said yes. I thought, God, that's intriguing. But it just went back to me with another question, or, maybe count to 5 backwards or something, or 10. So I felt, well, that was a bit of a missed opportunity there. There were some interesting questions about childhood and about what we had inherited from our family, and not our parents, but the previous generation. And again, I was asked that, but caller A was not. So, I was just left feeling that I had talked a lot about my family, and then I had to sort of hang up. Yeah.
I know. I also had that experience that it requires 2 people to phone in. So the first time I tried to do it, the other person didn't phone in and didn't show up. So they just hang up on you. They say the other person is not turned up. Goodbye.
Right.
And it actually reminded me of, those very rare occasions where the audience is smaller than the cast on stage, and you're sitting there feeling very self-conscious and wondering, to what extent can the show go on if there's even just an audience member of one. And I was thinking, well, I turned up,
Yeah.
really, again, and that may have predisposed me to not particularly being a fan of it. I'm not sure. So I think it would have been, for me, it was one of those events as well that I really thought it missed the fact that it didn't have the real life counterpart to it, and that it didn't adapt in the context where, and this is what we've been saying about all these shows and in our discussion beforehand, we need connection. We are all like, look at us. We're not in a room together. We're all sitting in our own spaces. So at least Robert gets to be in a theatre, which is very cool. Those two, I wanted to start with those two shows because in a way those were already designed as going to be in an online form. But I'd like now to move to talking about the Anu production show, The Party to End All Parties, which Anu obviously is very, very famous for doing site-specific work in Dublin, and taking you either as a single audience member or in very, very small groups into parts of the city that that are normally not accessible to members of the public, and to encountering stories in a kind of bottom-up version of history and memory that again feel very anti-establishment. And they had to adapt, obviously, this production to being in their usual métier of incredibly embodied to a virtual level. So Peter, you watched The Party to End All Parties, although it looks like, no, you haven't frozen. You're there. You watched the streaming of it live yesterday. How was that for you?
I did watch the stream live yesterday. I watched both streams of it yesterday, which can feel like an immense indulgence to anybody who's familiar with Anu's work for Dublin Theatre Festival, where to see any performance of Anu in Dublin Theatre Festival, several lotteries on the same day. Absolutely, it was a performance that was designed to take place in the open air, using Dublin City as so much of Anu's work has done before. That had, I think, a streaming version of Always Planned to extend the reach, and then became reliant on these two streams, which is performances, to be shared with any audience who wanted. And it's that you talk about memory, about kind of like the mingling of a place's memory with its present. A lot of their performances have felt like hauntings to me. It's where there seems to be a blurring of time zones that you might but also whisked away to the early years of going through Moore Street and in who had fled from 1916 Rising. In this, time itself becomes a kind of a preoccupation. It's inspired by the moment that the Kovar became officially a republic in 1949, on April the 18th, I think, and the celebrations. And beyond that, inspired by one photograph, which is surreal to behold, even outside of COVID, because it's people just all across the Connell Bridge and filling every aspect. There it is, filling every aspect of the city. Inconceivable that number of people could even inhabit Dublin City. Never mind that there's not a mask among them when you look at them through their eyes. Here I wasn't entirely sure how the timelines were meant to combine. You get a sense of anything that you are responding to a present limit. If you're anything like me, you will have had conversations at some point over the last 7 months with colleagues where you are unable to say precisely when something happened. I've had conversations in which I cannot say anything beyond, I know that this happened at a point that was not today or yesterday, but at some point. The time has become kind of a strange sort of numb limbo without all the of the year. we're kind of looking at sort of the erasure of having had begun with the erasure of Easter. And this performance seems a sense of limbo more apparent, that there are people living in contemporary Dublin dealing with problems of domestic violence or guardianship, or dealing with emergencies when the world is on something kind of much more global, and understandably, but that these are lives that are being obscured and are worthy of attention. Whether or not they're in some way related to the foundation of the Republic, it seemed that this is the consequence of people who the Republic has not held dear, who not for. But I found my connections throughout that they weren't becoming very apparent to me. They felt more a little bit more disjointed. And we say we move. What I really mean is the camera moves. This is the role of the audience in Anu is so important. The participant, the contributor, you have these intimate experiences that seem to be yours and yours alone, and you kind of find yourself swapping them with other people to see what experiences or perspectives they've had, to get a sense of kind of a picture that is just sort of so all-encompassing an individual could carry it themselves. And here you are replaced by the camera lens. As with the adaptability to that lens, but the rhetoric becomes a little bit more apparent. There is no room for you to actually reply. There's a spontaneity in what you were guided through, which I watched at two different points, 2 hours apart, and saw under very different lighting, which I think Owen Boss's set design hints the divine. And I saw Dublin, and it looked gorgeous. It was artistically gorgeous. And I found myself admiring the camera work and the streaming technology, the sort of of the stream. This did not dip out. But the Dublin I saw was unreal to me. It was beautiful. It was not transformed. It was fetishized by the lens. The lights on the water, the slow that it would seem to be able to dip into, the way it was able to juxtapose from one shot to another. There was an artistry associated considerably more with you than with a live performance. But then I didn't see the city in a different way. I saw the city in a kind of a lacquered way, and I found that a little more distracting. And then the experience that is related became compelling. The stories of pain, and desperation, and lives. I feel invisible, I think, are the first words. Somebody clearly kind of recruited by some consultancy firm that are trying to spin the crisis into moments to not just recover, but thrive. And you get the sense that energies are misplaced. But then those stories, we remain with individuals for quite some time. And the stories choked with detail. I actually kind of found myself getting hung up on who was who, what were the consequences of these stories. And that they both finally resolve in asking us to regard the ballast ball keeping piece of apparatus that I noted when it was 1 p.m. for the dockers, but actually fell in Dublin 12:35 or Dublin mean time. Sort of lost time or time, a time that you might claim, or so on. And I got distracted here again because I felt they hadn't sort of seized on their own metaphor. They were sort of talking about this kind of interlude of 25 minutes and saying, we saw the light here first, which I think as far as the world turns, I wondered if the first actor had misspoke, but then the second actor also said it. And so there was some sort of confusion into, I guess, what direction sun rises and sets, because we didn't. And as does the entreaty to make the most of these, these special sort of 25 minutes that have been, because I think if I was in the middle of a city, I might then take the call to use this 25 minutes to do something profound or sort of, not so far considered. But sitting in with the blinds drawn down from the same glow that they were out in, because I couldn't see my screen properly because of the sunlight. I just felt kind of that much more removed. And that's why I felt kind of everyone for doing a performance, for engaging and transmitting, to use the word, a performance. I felt the poignancy of that performance being diminished particular.
Helen, you've seen quite a few Anu shows as well. How was it for you watching the streamed version?
Well, I mean, first of all, I was just so impressed at the speed at which Anu, just had to change and transpose this and to create a live streamed performance or transmission that was so polished, just incredibly polished, and the performances were stunning, and so I had mixed feelings because I love Anu. I mean, I just think they're an extraordinary group of artists, and I think in terms of Irish theatre, a new show by Anu is what I would get most excited about. So part of me felt it was kind of a bittersweet as I sat down to watch this on my screen, but I was very impressed by what they did. I felt that again there was something missing. There was some connective tissue missing between the historical moment of the Declaration of the Irish Republic and the extraordinary celebrations on O'Connell Bridge, and these characters' lives, and Dublin today, and the concern about life in Dublin, about the inequalities, about the hidden lives and the people who are invisible, and those those social questions that Anu are always looking at. And then the stretch to talk about time and the nature of time. The marketing young woman is out asking people on the street about their ideas about the clock change. So the time as a metaphor is straining to get into this piece, and it's not fully integrated. And it's such to introduce time as a metaphor is just adds this kind of weight, and I think it couldn't quite bear it. And then I think the strain to talk about Joyce and the ballast ball, and then all the characters coming back to his observation about it, and so it just felt a real stretch to bring in history, politics, the future and present and future of the city, and time itself. So it's sort of the first thing. Yeah, no small matters. But the first time I really thought with an Anu show, no, it's not quite grounded yet. But then again, they've also had to change the form of it completely. And what we're missing is that wonderful, personal, intense, intimate interaction with where you're right in it with them. You're sort of exposing yourself. You're sharing your own feelings. So when you lose all that, you start looking at it almost as a piece of film. And then, of course, the critical mind starts saying, "Oh, there's a bit of a gap there. There's a bit of a hole there." But if I had been on the street and following them in the usual way into these dingy corners or up back streets, and being offered drugs or whatever, I might have had a different. I would have been a much more full-on subjective experience. So I do think you are not really comparing like with like here.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of those ways in which the city just looks different. I mean, it looks gorgeous, Peter, because I haven't been in there for so long. But one of the ways in which it's different is that the thing with the cameras, they can really control where you're looking.
Yeah.
Which they can't. And so I found exactly the same as you, the issues with time, but the ballast building is gone. And I loved that reveal at the end, that they kind of moved the camera and you're looking at this building going, that's not the ballast. Oh, okay. And so that was one of those tiny moments where you thought, okay, they are really exploiting this form as much as they can. And Robert, I know you're not as familiar with Anu, but you did get to watch it.
Yes, and I when I was at the Dublin Theatre Festival a couple of years ago, I experienced a new performance, so I know I was quite terrified. And maybe Peter remembers what the title was. Then it's in 2013 or something. Yeah,
or is it Holy Street or something?
World's End Lane.
You end up somewhere in the bus station also. That's
Vardo.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it.
In Busaris, that's right. That was about trafficking.
Yes. Exactly, and I used to cite specific performances in Holland, but this got me quite scared how personal and raw it was, which I found really interesting at the time. So when I was watching the streaming yesterday, it felt it's not that in your face. It's literally not in your face. There's a glass between it, the glass of your screen or the glass of the camera, and that takes actually the risk off. So what they do also in the performance I saw in 2013, and Helen also say, they take those social issues and take you and push your nose into it, literally, quite literally, which makes it so intense. It's people who you don't see normally, and they drag you out and show them to you. And that is, of course, very different when when it's filmed, and also, as you say, Emily, you cannot control where you're looking. So I was also in 2013 really busy with myself and how people would react to me sitting in a bus station with a stranger, which was part of, for me, the experience, because I felt a little bit how they might feel in a bus station being alone. So that is what I missed, of course. So yeah.
And there's always that weird thing of like, yes, you go to a new show to be made scared, and obviously aware of social issues.
Exactly, yeah.
Challenged and excited, yeah, absolutely.
But being dragged off the street and pushed into a car, that was a new theatre experience for me.
Yeah. Well, we always had this idea in Ireland that, you know, theatre on the continent is so much more daring and exciting. So it's nice to know that we are doing work here, which we, you know, that is challenging boundaries, even of someone from the Netherlands, which is, you know, obviously much more exciting than we are. Thank you very much. I want now to turn to our final show that we're going to talk about, which happened in real life, and which I actually saw straight after the streaming of the new show. So it was a kind of a combination of virtual and embodied, and that's the Abbey Theatre's co-production with the Dublin Theatre Festival of The Great Hunger, the Patrick Kavanagh poem, which was performed in Imma by a cast of actors and musicians. Helen, what did you make of The Great Hunger?
Well, I was really, I was kind of giddy. I was giddy on the night I went just to be at a live performance, and I just couldn't wait to see this. And it was already dark. Went to an 8 o'clock performance. Actually, Peter was at the same one, and it was already dark. So I didn't have the experience of the light falling. Though a lot of people have talked about how beautiful that was. But the setting of the Royal Hospital Kilmainham, the grounds of where Imma is, they were beautifully used. The whole conception of having an outdoor piece because of the pandemic, but making the absolute most of the trees, the grass, the sense that we were able to imagine actually being in a stony grey soil of Monaghan with Patrick Maguire. We could, it was, even though, yes, you could see you could hear the traffic rolling by and so on, and you could see the apartment blocks, but actually you could imagine, you could allow yourself to be in a rural place. And the fact that it was dark added a fantastic atmosphere, because the audience were masked, of course, and as it got colder, I mean, the temperature plummeted, and by the end everyone was just shrouded in hats, gloves, hoods, and so that was quite mysterious. So you can't really see anybody else. There's no facial, there's no interaction with the audience, and so you're walking through the darkness, just led by these beautiful lighting, little signifiers by Paul Keoghan, and a little archway at the beginning, like a proscenium arch to go through to show, and then to show that the show has begun. And then we're taken on a long avenue following Lisa O'Neill's, raucous singing, luring us, down out into the open countryside, as it were, and just beautiful LED, just vertical little slivers. I thought the scenography was beautiful, carefully chosen, and I also loved Conor Linehan's composition and musical arrangement and score. And it was just such a lovely fusion of quite old folk music, not necessarily Irish. I think it was a fusion of traditions, folk music, Irish traditional music, and then classical, and with 10 stunningly good musicians and singers, and I loved that. And so when we go from episode to episode of the poem, if you like, the actual text, we're sort of with this troupe of like troubadours or something. It felt very timeless, and they were leading us and singing and playing at the same time, and there was a sense of the mystery of performance, and so in that sense it got the celebratory side of Kavanagh, his more spiritual side of communing with nature and all that, the side of Kavanagh that's not really in The Great Hunger, it has to be said. I mean, the Great Hunger, I think the programme notes described it as a masterpiece, but I really don't think it's a masterpiece. And so for me, everything about the staging and the setting transcended the origin text, and that was fine. That was a good thing as far as I was concerned. And then some of the performances were just very, very poignant. In particular, Derval Crotty, I found, waiting for us under the tree as the kind of older Paddy Maguire, sort of settling more into acceptance, and so it's actually, I actually find that part of the poem the best anyway, because it's more subtle, it's less angry and shouty, and so I thought her at that point, she's playing Maguire, kind of going to the church and kind of sort of not stopping. He's not railing against the church as much. He's settling in the evening to play cards. He's basically becoming middle-aged, and but she played that with such a lovely mixture of the ruefulness, the self-recognition of that this is it. This is what his life is going to be. Mm-hmm. And that was the only time I was actually moved. Even though all of the caliber of performances was wonderful, but a lot of the time I felt quite removed from the content because I just didn't think the writing was very good.
Yeah, controversial statement, I'm going to say. Someone who teaches it in English.
Later poems, the really beautiful, the more lyrical ones. Yeah. So.
Okay, I'm with you on it. I'm just glad you're the one who said it. I know you got cold during the performance, but I'm sure there was warmth going on as well.
There was a very sustaining glow from within throughout the entire experience. Like Helen, this was the first in-person theatre event that I'd attended for 7 months, and the sort of the wellspring of goodwill towards the Abbey and Emma for having this happen at all was, I thought, kind of amazing. We didn't mention it with the Dead Center performance, but even with these avatars on iPads, I realized that the pleasure of seeing people in attendance at a theatre event was something that was entirely missing kind of from my experience. And here something similar happened, even though we were safely within the sort of the 15 max people that were allowed. And to the point that Helen mentioned this kind of glorious LED frame, which actually is, I guess, the sort of the proscenium, but also is the doorway to heaven. And for people who are this starved of performance, kind of that doesn't feel like too much of an exaggeration. And the scenography, the lighting of the space by Paul Kilgan, the energy and composure of the performances all were quite glorious to behold. It feels almost treacherous to have a critical thought when you're engaging with the production, because it's it's like getting through a desert and being handed a bottle of Evian and saying, "I'm sorry, do you have Perrier?"
Don't do it, Peter. Don't do it.
No, I shouldn't. But but I was inclined to reflect on certain things that I kind of previously I would have gone, is that a choice or is that a mistake? So if Liam Carney is pulling these kind of grocery aisle pristine potatoes out of the folds of the Emma Gardens, does that necessarily correspond with the stony grey soil of Monaghan that we're there to evince? If not, why not? And Helen talks about kind of letting the buildings, the traffic sort of recede, that you can imagine yourself within kind of this evocation of rural Ireland in the 1940s. I found it kind of rather poignant to see them both simultaneously, in a way that kind of I often feel is the pleasure of anew, to see the sort of the then and now mingle. And there are things I think that you might want to upbraid Patrick Kavanagh over. like, the terrible quality of his poetry. But maybe there's the obsession, which doesn't, I think, punch so hard about the body, about sexuality and impulse denied, where I thought performance was inclined to ram it. That kind of, sort of a couple of stones and sort of an impotent worm. There's no ambiguity about how that is presented. And where you might say, oh, please, the point is made, and more so. I think a beat later, with those apartment blocks in the background and their, vulture landlords and their 24-hour gyms and the depopulation of the city and people essentially on some level or level and a bit of lockdown. Isolation is not a small point and not necessarily something that's a hard sell. Frustration of desire or opportunity or future is depressingly resonant right now. And so kind of I found that the material, which I wasn't expecting really to sort of have a crushing relevance, became more relevant for the things that just couldn't be kept outside of the scenographic arch. And so that those things, and I was attentive. I haven't had material for some time, so I was there, and I was there all the way. And then I could look past certain things that would otherwise get to me about, was there enough rhythm in performance? A lot of it felt kind of like it was hammering on the same beat, which is not to take away from the individual performers, rather that there wasn't kind of like the variation you might want across the course of a lifetime. But it was also, you couldn't help but see the method of its manufacture. This was a show with 2 directors. This was a show with no more than maybe 2 or 3 performers, sometimes with musicians, 4 or 5, well spaced out. And I almost saw myself sort of analyzing their rehearsals while watching the performance. That this had to have been done in capsules, that this had to have been done in a way to avoid contagion, that we were moving through the space in a way that kept us safe, reassuringly safe. The other thing we know about The Great Hunger is it's the source text for one of the most legendarily risk-taking, bold physical performances in the Abbey's kind of, recent history. Not a show that I've seen. It was on at a time when theatre would have been way past my bedtime, but a show that I've read an awful lot about because it's so important. And where that seems to be this totem of risk and adventure, here it was something different. It was actually something designed to be a safe experience, yeah. which I value this time more than ever, and yet kind of couldn't help but be struck by the difference.
Yeah, I mean, it was just I could have cried with gratitude to be. I mean, and this is one of the things that we were talking about earlier as well. The fact that it is hugely admirable and an incredible feat of determination and technical ability and love to make theatre and turn it into virtual on things that we can stream and watch and experience, even if we can't be in the theatre. But it does not compare to seeing the body of an actor and the light and the dust motes and feeling the cold and I just stood there thinking, oh, I love watching actors, and the extent of the body. So now that we have a few minutes at the end of this, I'd just love to hear some of your now turn it into philosophy. I'd love to hear some of your responses to, how experiencing theatre has been. And Robert, I might start with you, because you have, like I said at the beginning, you are in a theatre, you're in a backstage area because you're making a show at the moment, and you will have a different perspective from us. So I might just ask you what you think happens to normal theatre in the current context.
Well, yeah, we're trying to make a dance show at the moment with the company I work for, Club Guy and Ronnie, and but it is Corona-proof. So we use the theater as a found space, and we place different dance solos in different parts of the building as a group. With no more than 30 people that are allowed, you move from one solo to the other. Based on Swan Lake, it's a modern dance version of Swan Lake. So we also had to this 7 months had to adapt as a company. And then the question is, how true do you stay to theater? So we had our fair share of registrations thrown online of performances, Zoom attended performances, and they also try to play theater online. And the thing is, if it's online, it's not theater. So it's something different. And that is, I think, what was an eye-opener to me, that there is, as a theater maker, a very large space of new possibilities with a new medium called, they call it the internet, I guess, which is, as that center shows, really something you can thematically make use of. And I think there is a large opportunity for theater makers. And as Peter said in the beginning, maybe you cannot call it luck, but I think you can call it luck that theater makers in Ireland, but also in Holland, make use of this opportunity to redefine what theater or live performance can be in 2020. And that is what I find really exciting. But maybe it's not theater, because I also was very emotional to see two actors again live on stage after 7 months or 6 months, yeah. And now we are racing to a new lockdown, I guess, in Holland. I'm afraid that's why we're now frantically trying to premiere. So we have something we can, after lockdown, we can show. Because I also want to make theater and dance performances, not only online theater, how interesting that can be. Is that an answer?
Yeah, absolutely. Peter, you look ruminative. Do you have? But I mean, it could be the angle of your screen.
Right. Yeah. I suppose kind of over the last 7 months, having suddenly nothing to watch or to experience in the way that I was accustomed to. There's been a lot of time to sort of, meditate on what's lacking, particularly when you get the sort of the near beer substitute of, streaming shows from many well-regarded theaters across the world. And I remember kind of, thinking about my responses to that, which became a little sort of like a hoarding mentality of seeing every stream of every show that I'd missed, and the possibility of it being, stored in a retrieval system to watch kind of like at leisure, and feeling so dissatisfied, feeling actually kind of like disengaged, that kind of like the level of engagement that allows you to either hit pause or go make a cup of tea, or not really share it with anybody, And during the time, Tiger King was really becoming the sort of shared experience of everybody. I mean, talk about to be a machine. We were sort of subsumed into Netflix. And that doesn't feel like any proper cultural substitute for gathering, and what the sort of a certain alchemy of gathering is, that transforms an experience into something that is considerably more than the sum of its parts. I've immense first of all, it's important to do something in any cases, however trying, however complicated, because it's important to have a continuity of the art form. It's important that it's evident, not just for people who are regularly going, but for people who want to believe they can have a future in art, in making performance. If you don't see it, you are less inclined to be it. So kind of like all of these things are doing an immense service for the cultural health of our nation and our planet. And I hope that doesn't sound grandiose. I really don't mean it like that. There's a value attached to it. My colleague Carlin Lillington said, "Don't give it away for free." Helen and I can very readily empathize with making things available to as many people as possible for as little as possible until you no longer have the product to give them. So I think kind of like asserting the value of the arts is immensely important. Campaigning has been hugely important, and a budget that reflects the necessity of keeping us going, keeping artists going, is beyond important. And in the meantime, what we're seeing is the really stirring example of the most adaptable among us. That it is not a sense of just kind of perseverance for perseverance's sake, but what you can do with the things that you've learned that can convey you in these extraordinarily difficult times. I think this festival, every conceivable hat off to it, is evidence of that. Charles Darwin is often misquoted for survival of the fittest as being kind of like the strongest that survive. Survival of the fittest is actually about the most adaptable being those that survive. It's what theatre has been doing since as long as we've had theatre, and it's gratifying and humbling to see it continue now.
I think what I have learned is that I will adapt to wear all of my coats and jumpers and scarves if it means I can go outside and watch actual theatre. Helen, how about you? How has the past 7 months been treating you? And you know, as in Ireland, as in the Netherlands, we face into another possible level 4 or level 5, and no indoor events. How are you feeling about theatre?
It's the thought of that is hard. I'm just, so admiring of Dublin Theatre Festival, everybody, and I agree with what Peter says about. I mean, it's just extraordinary, and also Dublin Fringe Festival, and that absolute determination to say we will make something of what has been made of us, by this set of circumstances. It also, I mean, going back to the spring, it certainly throws into relief what a critic does. What a critic is for, even more than usual, and when there is actually, there is a couple of things online you might write about, or, and then that relationship between, the dependence on somebody else's activity for you to actually have something to talk about. I found that hard. I found that made me ask some very hard questions about myself, which is all to the good. I agree. We're just going to have to wrap up and brave the winter. But I also think that in terms of the form, I think that the work that will make the technology central or integral to the form of the piece, whatever we like to call this, digital drama or online theatre. I mean, you can say, is it theatre? Well, it's making new work using these forms, and that's the way. That's to me where the future will. One strand of the future will be where that people will get more and more innovative and creative about saying, no, we have to live like this remotely for the moment. How do we make work? How do we make performance? It's not, no, we're not together in the temple in real time, but we are together right now. We're able to talk to each other. And I thought Dead Centre was a really good example of that. Also, Irish National Opera made the abduction from the Seraglio by Mozart. They turned it into a show called Seraglio, which they made and had all the orchestra playing separately, but that interspliced and brilliantly edited. And they weren't hiding the fact that they were all at home.
Oh no! Oh no!
We lost Helen.
Just as we were talking about technology and our need to live with it and within it, we will wait and see if Helen comes back. Hopefully she will, but maybe she won't. And I actually see that we have been talking for an hour already, which is, well, I mean, it is the advantage of the digital form that we can all be in the same kind of sort of place, but also that we don't have a deadline because we don't have to be out of the theatre in order for the show to start. But we do have to be mindful, I think, of people's attention and people's time. I want to really thank all of our critics, Helen, Robert and Peter, for their incredible contributions. And I think on behalf of all of us, I really want to thank Dublin Theatre Festival, not just for making it apparent that critics are still important, and giving us this platform, but really for giving us something that we could actually talk about, because it was such a yo-yo in terms of it's on, it's off, in terms of government guidelines, and the festival consistently said it's on, we are on. So I think that's just it's been very moving to see the work, but just to see the passion behind it. It reaffirms our need for this forum. So I'm going to say goodbye to everybody who is watching from home or wherever it is, Skyping off or watching, and have a lovely weekend. And hopefully we will be all together in an audience again sometime soon. Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Emily.